After all this time, the next Don't Starve Together rework is finally here, and it's none other than our beloved Wendy. Wendy's affinity for communicating with the deceased has evolved. She can now craft a number of elixirs in her new Ectoherbology tab, allowing her to buff Abigail in numerous ways, as well as being able to direct misguided spirits who have lost their way, in exchange for a valuable ethereal essence. In addition to the new content, this update also adds a number of quality of life changes to Wendy, specifically to do with controlling Abigail, intending to make her easier to use and a lot less of a suicidal kamikaze warrior. The update manages to add a massive amount of personality to Abigail. She feels like a lot more than simply a murderous cardboard cutout. With a number of new animations, her presence is a lot more notable. Pair this with the update's animated short, which was quite well done, Abigail certainly feels like much more of a character. In general, Abigail feels a lot more refined, in-depth, and clearly has a much larger impact on the game. Instead of simply summoning and forgetting about her, Wendy can now control how Abigail behaves using the flower, and give her additional buffs using the ghostly elixirs. However, some qualms exist about Abigail's prowess. Some are questioning whether Abigail is actually worse damage-wise than she was before her rework. Her versatility and accessibility have been improved to a great degree, but changes to how her damage scales leave some in doubt about the update. But enough jibber jabber, time to get into the exact details of how the new Wendy and Abigail function. Abigail's flower still remains the main method of summoning Abigail, however with a few notable changes. First of all, the flower begins fully charged, and there is no need to wait the previous 6 days before summoning Abigail. Wendy also no longer needs to drop the flower on the ground and sacrifice a creature to invoke her sister's presence. Instead, simply right-clicking on the flower will call Abigail forth. The timer for resummoning Abigail is also a lot shorter than before. The longer that Abigail exists in the world, the higher her health will grow, to a maximum of 600 after a few days. This timer will reset if she dies, but Wendy can click on the flower and then click on Abigail in order to store her current power, allowing her to summon Abigail again when she is required. By right-clicking on the flower, Abigail can either rile up or soothe Abigail, which will either cause her to attack virtually anything on sight, or only attack creatures that Wendy commands her to attack, as well as creatures that attack either of them. This decision between two AIs allows Wendy to have much more precise control over her spectral sibling. The way that Abigail's damage is calculated has also changed completely. Instead of Abigail drawing strength from the nighttime, her damage will logarithmically increase the lower Wendy's health gets. The exact equation and graph is on the screen now. As you can see, Wendy is required to be extreme lows of health for Abigail to deal considerably larger amounts of damage. Furthermore, Abigail actually deals less damage individually when facing a crowd of enemies, specifically 2 or more, just over half of her default 20 damage. Her DPS will still remain higher, however she will actually end up being weaker than her pre-rework format dealing with crowds, at least during the dusk and nighttime. This change somewhat goes against her shtick of being a proficient crowd control damage source. Although Abigail's DPS is technically higher when facing multiple enemies, it still feels like a really odd decision to make. Additionally, Abigail regenerates 1 health every second, and temporarily receives 100% damage resistance after getting hit by an enemy, indicated by a shield appearing around her. This new shield gives her a lot more survivability when facing a crowd. Finally, the new update also adds a small number of craftables, namely the special potions found in Abigail's new Ectoherbology tab. Each of them buffs Abigail in a specific way, and all of them require a new character-specific resource, Morning Glory, to craft. Morning Glory can be found by firstly locating a pipspook, small childlike ghosts who have a small chance to appear around a grave, which means that they are most common in the graveyard biome. By right-clicking on a pipspook, Wendy can attempt to commune with them, which will begin a minigame of sorts in which the pipspook will attempt to lead Wendy to one of their lost possessions. The pipspook will emit noises and effects, with increasing intensity the closer Wendy is to the lost trinket, similar to how the divining rod works. Upon successfully locating the ghostly item, the pipspook will emit a small amount of Morning Glory. The minigame can be repeated a small number of times, after which the pipspook will disappear, leaving behind a larger amount of glory. The whole process will result in around 6. Initially getting the pipspook to get a signal and start emitting effects and noises can be tricky. You essentially have to wander around in circles until you get close enough. Completing this little quest is definitely worth it, as with a number of Morning Glory and another ingredient, Wendy can make one of any number of drams or braces in order to temporarily increase Abigail's power. Revenants Restorative is made with 1 spider gland and 1 glory. Giving it to Abigail will increase her natural health regen from 1 to 2 per second over a couple of days. Spectral Cure-All is a more potent version of the restorative, using a telltale heart instead of a spider gland and 4 glory instead of 1. It restores Abigail's health at 20 per second for 15 seconds, resulting in a grand total of 300. The Unyielding Draft increases the duration of Abigail's shield from around half a second to 0.8 seconds for 1 minute, crafted with 1 log and 2 glory. Distilled Vengeance is the upgraded version of the draft, made with 1 living log and 4 glory. It has the same effects as its lesser variant, but makes Abigail reflect 20 damage to all opposers who attack her shield. The Choleric Tonic increases Abigail's attack damage by 20% for 1 minute, crafted with 1 stinger and 1 glory. Finally, Vigor Mortis increases her movement speed by 70% for 3 whole days. It's made with 1 honey and 2 glory. As of now, Wendy can only apply one of these buffs to Abigail at a time. Attempting to apply multiple will simply override the previous buff. Finally, Wendy can also craft the Cistern, a small memorial structure made with 3 boards, 3 cut stone and 1 ash in the Structures tab. It can be opened to reveal 4 inventory slots, in which petals can be placed. A cistern decorated with 4 petals will both act as a sanity station, restoring a considerable 25 sanity per minute when standing near it, and also to buff Abigail as it makes her gain her max health increases 4 times faster. Building a cistern is certainly worth it. It's fairly cheap to make, and although upkeeping the 4 petals can be a minor hassle, the rewards are excellent. That's pretty much the technical side of this update covered, but what remains are a few questions. Was this a good update? Is Wendy better now? And does this update really constitute as a refresh, i.e. a complete rewrite of how a character works? First off, regarding art, style and design, this update pretty much hit every nail on the head. The trailer, Abigail's new animations, all of it. Nothing new there. Secondly, a number of players have been debating whether this update actually made Wendy better gameplay-wise. Whether or not that's actually a goal of the character refreshes is up to debate, but making a character worse after their specific update ultimately wouldn't make much sense. Since Abigail lost her damage increase at night, and instead has her previous dust time damage all the time, it can be easy to see why she may appear worse. Having Abby's damage output scale with the time of the day was certainly an interesting choice. While her damage fluctuation is a constant and is completely predictable, the player cannot control when it occurs, and instead must simply wait for the day to pass. Having Abigail's damage be more constant, along with its ability to be buffed at will by the player, certainly makes a lot more sense than the daytime mechanic. Abby's damage buff relative to Wendy's health is also interesting, but the fact that Wendy's health has to literally halve in order to give Abigail a considerable damage buff of 20 makes risky play required for higher damage numbers, as below half health Abigail's damage rises rapidly. Another arguable nerf that Abigail received is that her health instead slowly increases from 200 to 600 instead of just being 600 at all times. This one's probably the biggest downgrade, as Abigail's power level never actually rises above what it was before, making her feel a lot weaker than before, and also making the new ability to store her power feel somewhat redundant. As a sort of compensation for these changes, Abigail does have an increased attack range, which allows her to attack and also stunlock larger crowds of enemies, which certainly reduces the amount of damage she takes when fighting large groups of grunt mobs, such as bees or spiders. Overall, she is definitely a lot weaker against single targets, and although this does feel like a rather large change, Abigail is meant to be the AoE king of sorts, dealing unrivaled group damage. Which does lead me to another one of Abigail's changes. Post-update, Abigail now deals less damage per hit when fighting a group of enemies. When Abigail is fighting tooth and nail with 2 or more enemies, her damage takes a massive hit, going down from 20 to a measly 12 per hit. This change is certainly an odd decision. Although Abigail still technically deals higher DPS versus multiple targets, it's still a massive damage nerf. Part of the beauty of area of effect attacks is that they can turn relatively low amounts of damage, such as 20, into a force of mass destruction by applying it to multiple targets. Abigail dealing less damage when fighting a crowd does kind of take away from the inherent idea and purpose of an AoE. While other AoEs and Don't Starve aren't the most common thing, Abigail is the only one with the reduced damage against crowds mechanic, which is certainly bizarre as dealing with crowds is supposed to be a whole shtick. The main boon that Abigail received out of this update is of course the tonics that Wendy can craft for her. The potions certainly give Abigail a lot more versatility, but since only one can be applied at a time, you really have to be careful in your decision between damage, maneuverability, or defense. Overall, I would certainly say that Abigail is a lot better off than she was before the update, with Wendy having much more control over her damage, and also with the large increase in versatility, Abigail becomes much more enjoyable to use. There are some changes that Clay could make, but most of them would simply involve changing of numbers and equations that define Abigail's damage. Similar to what happened with Woody's update, it's probable that Clay will change Wendy and Abigail's stats a tiny bit further. There is one more thing that I wanted to discuss, and while it is slightly off topic, it's certainly important regarding the future of DST's updates. Does every character really need a refresh? Now, way back when Clay announced the character refreshes, they specifically said that every character would receive one. A refresh in this instance meaning a complete fundamental revisiting of that character, complete with new stats and abilities. Most of the community were in universal agreement that a few certain characters needed their respective updates, most notably Winona, Willow, and Woody. For the most part, these updates work to make these three characters more valuable parts of the game, more enjoyable to players, and more balanced. However, many of the future characters with planned reworks arguably already fit these three criteria. Characters such as Maxwell and Wigford, they are highly valued and treasured amongst the game's players, they are usually found to be highly enjoyable, and they both have great downsides and great upsides. Of course, pretty much every character could always do with some minor quality of life changes and minor number tweaking, similar to what Wendy has received, but does this really justify the need for an entire fundamental rewrite like Willow, Woody, and Winona? Characters like Maxwell and Wigford are essentially perfect. There isn't much that could be changed about them that would ultimately end up improving them, in my opinion. That doesn't mean that every character shouldn't receive an update of some sort. As stated before, it would still be amazing to receive quality of life and other small changes for each character, as well as, of course, the animated shorts and new skins. Even Wendy's character refresh doesn't really count as such. Most of it is very high-level changes such as the tonics and more advanced control over Abigail. Wendy's playstyle and place in the game still remain the same. But anyway, that's pretty much all in store for this video. Please be sure to leave a comment. What do you think about Wendy's rework? Her animated short. Does every character need a refresh like this? It's always great to see you guys' opinions on this sort of thing, so get that discussion rolling. But yeah, that's all I have for now. So wash your hands, stay safe, and I guess I'll see you next time.